This week on the agenda, China-EU relations. What does 2023 have in store for trade between Beijing and Brussels? At the end of 2022, trips by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and European Council Chief Charles Michel to Beijing highlighted the importance of the relationship between China and the EU. In December, then Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi promised to repair relations with the EU, saying China and Europe are each other's partners, not rivals, and we are each other's opportunities, not threats. So what might we expect to see in 2023? Well, with me now, Jörg Wuttke, President of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, Wang Huiyao, Founder and President of the Centre for China and Globalization, and Dewit, Chair of the Belgian-Chinese Chamber of Commerce. Gentlemen, Happy New Year. It's great to see all of you. I want to start by asking each of you where you see the EU's relations with China at the moment. Jörg, let's start with you.
Well, it's very mixed, of course. We had a very rough 3 years. No real visits by either of the VIPs. Just as you said, started again in November. Business has been brilliant, in particular for Chinese exporters. European exports to China were good over the last 2 years. Of course, now COVID has been slaughtering our sales into China. So 2023, I guess, is going to be a comeback story. It's going to be visiting dignitaries coming again to our capitals, as well as business coming into China. So 2023 has to be better than 2022.
Is that how you see it as well, Wang Huiyao?
Yeah, I see this. I agree with you. I think that 2023 will bring more predictions, more actually reliability, and more growth actually for bilateral relations between China and the EU. I mean, I see that in several fronts. I mean, first of all, I think business community now finally can have their agenda put into practice, and then all the CEOs now can come to China free of quarantine now, and also a lot of business plan can be made. And vice versa, there will be a lot of Chinese probably going to European countries to start their business. And we're already seeing some Chinese, businessmen grouping into different countries, trying to secure their purchase order or selling orders. That is already happening now. And another thing I would see is the European countries always being a very good destination for China tourists. And you know that before pandemic, China has 150 million outbound tourists. Quite a large chunk of that goes to Europe. And so I really hope that, on both fronts, we'll lift all the restrictions and we can have more traffic, more student exchanges and tourism. And so I'm optimistic. I think that given last 3 years of suppressed demand and supply, now we would unleash a new momentum and a new high growth for our bilateral trade and business relations.
So a lifting of COVID restrictions, maybe reopening up of tourism routes, especially with that direct Athens to Shanghai flight. Now, there's also a new Chinese foreign minister. Bernard, what do you see in terms of 2023 and that relationship between China and the EU?
Well, I will fully agree with Mr. Wuttke and Mr. Wang. I would say EU-China relations, we are an old couple. Remember, first diplomatic relations established in 1975, so quite a long time ago. We have ups and downs. The first love is maybe not exactly now the same. We have had some more difficult moments, and the COVID has not helped with that. But I would say, personally, I'm relatively optimistic. What I see is that even though there was COVID, the number of investments in China, the amount of investments are still impressive. We see also that we have had, and you have mentioned it, the visits of high-level delegations to China very recently coming from Europe. We expect some new ones coming. What we expect also for the business people is the fact that it is now much easier to travel. That will help with new projects, because the existing projects could continue, and thanks to the technology like we have now with video technology, but with a new project, it was quite difficult without personal meetings to start with.
And that's something that the EU's Charles Michel talked about when he met President Xi in December, talking about Europe being ready to strengthen strategic communication and coordination on the European side. So I wonder, Jörg, how you envisage that. How's it going to look, and how quickly might we notice the change?
Well, again, we are totally different systems, political systems. That does make it easier. I think meeting people, actually shaking hands, sitting down for lunch or dinner, it makes a heck of a difference. I think online really made the kind of miscommunications worse. The perceptions of someone else being negative are growing. So in a way, we just have to acknowledge that we disagree on a couple of topics and then try to find common ground, finding climate change, biodiversity, market opening, and particularly, of course, 2023, our leaders really have to improve on communication, cooperation, on COVID, on traveling. This year has to be better. And again, it makes a heck of a difference in order to just do this face to face.
It's interesting you talk about that common ground. And Wang Huiyao, I'd like to bring you in here, because something else Charles Michel said was that this was a timely opportunity to engage on matters of common interest with China. What are those common interests?
Well, I think, first of all, I think China, European, EU are a long civilization, great nations, a community, and there's a lot of a similarity, rich culture, historical, heritage that we shared in exchanges, Silk Roads and all those things. But also further, I think that EU and China, we don't have a geopolitical bordering issues or any fight or anything. We don't have a border dispute, for example. And then thirdly, I think we are actually very complementary in terms of business and culture and trade and exchanges and people-to-people exchanges. So there's a lot of that. And then finally, I think EU also more strategically independent. It's not in a rivalry as US with China, for example. I mean, we have differences. We have challenges from time to time, but by and large, we can still manage that. I think if we, through the dialogue, through the face-to-face meetings like Jörg mentioned, I think that the recent, for example, Chancellor Scholz meetings with top leaders. I mean, we have secured a vaccine of German vaccine to be used in China. We have Chinese leaders saying that nuclear weapon cannot be used against any nations. And, those are good messages, I think, out of the face-to-face talk.
I do want to talk a little bit about the challenges, because they are there. I mean, the EU has acknowledged that there's an acceleration of what it's called systemic rivalry with China. So, Jörg, where do you see those tensions, and what impact do they really have?
Clearly, the paper issued, I think, 4 years ago about China being partner, competitor, and rival pretty much nails it. It's exactly how we should look at this. The point there is, where do we emphasize it? Do we emphasize partnership, or do we emphasize rival? Clearly, there's a rivalry in political terms. We have of different systems, and we just have to acknowledge it. China doesn't want to hear it. Our people overemphasize it. So I think we have to see where we can actually sort of find rules and regulations to compete fair and square on third markets, for example. And then on partnership, how can we deepen it by, for example, opening up the Chinese economy more? After all, European consumers create 16 million jobs in China, whereas China just about creates 2 million jobs in Europe, and that has to change. Just also in the face of the dependency discussion that's going on in my own country, Germany, where if people feel we are too dependent on China, and my issue there is I want to be more interdependent with China.
You talk about that interdependence, you talk about opening up. So Bernard, I wonder if you would chime in and agree with those things that Jörg was saying, because the European Commission has suggested that in 2023 it's going to take closer control, or look to take closer control, of how companies invest abroad.
Yeah, well, I would agree with what Jörg said previously. Interdependence is very important. We can take protectionist measures, and there are tendencies all over the world, not only in Europe, but in the US, in China could be also. But that we will be all losing with that. Look at the challenges that were mentioned, climate change, common research and development within the companies, relationship between universities. Due to COVID, we had very few exchanges of researchers and students. Now we can hope that this year we will have more exchanges, which is very important to understand each other better. The danger are slogans. If we start with unilateral slogans, we are dead, I would say. That is not the solution. Respect, listening to each other. We have our own values. You have in China your values, yes, but there are common grounds. Let's find what we can have together, what we can build up together. That is, I think, more positive, and our population, our companies, our industries will all profit from that. If we start a discussion by telling the other, well, you are the bad guy and we want you to change immediately, you go nowhere. Let's start by finding common grounds. Let's start by developing some projects together with all our knowledge and resources.
Well, Mr. Wang, let's talk a little bit more then about understanding each other. China's new ambassador to the EU, Feng Chong, said embracing multilateralism was in the best interest of China, the EU, and indeed the broader global community. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think that there's foundation there. I think that European actually has benefited greatly from multilateralism. European is a great supporter of multilateralism, and same is true with China. I mean, China embraced globalization and multilateralism, and China has benefited from that too. So now we do have differences. I think is that we have to, work together and find a way to solve those differences. I mean, certainly we are different systems, not for thousands of years, but we can really set aside differences and maximize the similarities. So I think we do have a common interest, like safeguard the multilateralism, safeguard WTO, and digital economy. We have a lot of similarity as well, and also we have. On the trade, there's a lot of we can rely on each other, and of course people-to-people exchange. That's even greater aspect of our bilateral relations. So I do see that we don't like unilateralism. we oppose that, and I think that there's a lot of similar grounds between China and the EU if we really talk to each other, if we're really starting this high-level dialogue. Fundamentally, we don't have any conflict.
In terms of trade, in terms of doing businesses with companies, small, medium and large, Bernard, in what ways might Europe need China more than China needs Europe?
Well, Europe needs China in the sense that China is a big market for European companies. We also have a certain number of companies in Europe welcoming Chinese companies and developing projects together. So in that sense, it is important. Don't forget that China is the second economy in the world, soon the first. We cannot ignore China. We need to have a kind of dialogue projects in common with China. So for SMEs, it is also important, even though some studies by think tanks show that for the moment, the European investments in China are more concentrated with big companies. and who have developed, and I will not mention the chemical sector in New York is the best example for that. But there should be more effort made to help SMEs to go to China, because as it has been said in other areas, China is not always an easy market for European companies, cultural differences, language, but there are still opportunities. And I think some help by big companies for smaller companies to access the China market could be a plus. So we need China. China is an important market, even though, as Jörg said, you have more Chinese companies investment or European companies investment in China than Chinese in Europe. But the fact that we are sometimes complaining about some aspects of doing business in China, but what I see also is that most of the European companies who were there several years ago are still there. So that means the market is there, the opportunities are there, and business perspectives are quite good.
We'll take a short pause there, gentlemen, but stay with us, as still to come here on the agenda. 10 years of Belt and Road. As China's initiative hits a key milestone, we'll find out what opportunities that could create for Europe.
Roger, that's clear.
We can try out the wild and the crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Welcome back to the agenda. Let's continue now with our look ahead to the developments we can expect in China-EU relations in the year to come. Still with me are Jörg Wuttke, President of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, Wang Huiyao, Founder and President of the Centre for China and Globalization, and Bernard Dewit, Chair of the Belgian-Chinese Chamber of Commerce. Europe has historically been dependent on China for the supply of rare earth materials to make stuff like EVs and wind turbines, solar panels, things that are all seen as really important components in the shift towards greener economics. How do you, Mr. Wang, see that relationship developing, considering geopolitical pressures?
Well, I think certainly China and the European countries can really work together cooperatively and supplement each other. For example, we see that the US has put almost 1,000 companies on entity list or watchable list. China hasn't really done anything to the US companies. I mean, let alone with European companies. I mean, also the US sanctions on China, for example, decoupling on the semiconductor area, was really hurting European companies too. I mean, all those semiconductor companies are getting so big is because they're selling the largest market is in China. China is the largest buyer of semiconductor, the chips of all those companies. So if the US, cut off their profit line, I mean, I'm sure those companies are not happy, including the European companies. I don't think China will retaliate the European companies for rare earths or any other things, because China hasn't retaliated the US yet. China is very, very, lenient and very, really still thinking safeguarding the free trade principle, where US has the champion for that, but now the US is violating all those free trade agreements now. So I think that China and the European countries are so important now, are two pillars for safeguarding the free trade and the WTO principles and all the others.
Well, since you brought up the United States, I mean, where do you think the US stands in terms of the EU's relations with China? Washington's been putting quite a bit of pressure on the EU to distance itself financially. You mentioned semiconductors, certainly at least from China. I mean, which side do you think Europe will come down on, Bernard?
Well, we see that US are are taking strong measures for export controls, aiming at companies using US technology that has impact, especially in the fields that has been said of semiconductors, artificial intelligence. But the risk is that for EU industry that we will have a higher cost. We have a certain number of EU companies that have to change attitude under US pressure. US pressure to reduce reliance on China and Chinese there. But what I see also is that we cannot go to self-reliance, and we see also that, for instance, with the semiconductors, the US policy is finally pushing China to develop its own industry, with the consequence that China will also order less from other countries and from the US. So that is, I think, not in favor of Europe. And that is why I think also EU companies and EU organization institutions are also reluctant to go further with these ban on some technologies export.
Jörg, I wonder what you think. Do you agree with that assessment?
But first of all, Europe has to find its own interest, has to define it. We are not there in order to copy and paste what the US wants us to do. But the US, of course, is a natural ally. But we have, for example, kept a very open market. Huawei's market share here is still 30% in European Union. And we rely on China to be equally open in order to make that case, that openness pays.
Wang Huiyao, 2023 marks the 10th anniversary of China's Belt and Road Initiative. How do you see that developing and progressing in Europe?
Well, I think that Belt and Road Initiative is a good program. You know, even though it was not perfect when it started. I mean, gradually they are improving that, and I see the China-European rail cargo has increased. Many folds and hundreds of public times in the last number of years. And I think there's many European cities are getting the trains directly from China. And certainly, there's more room to cooperate. I mean, I particularly see that China has an agreement with the French government on the third countries. I mean, that can be applied to the Belt and Road countries. And let's work together. And AIB can also work with European Union countries, because most of European Union companies are stakeholders of AIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the EU have a global gateway, and China has a BI. Well, let's have B3W also join that. So I see a huge potential for infrastructure. Where is the after climate change? This is the green infrastructure that we needed for the global south, and China and the EU should work together. And also 10th anniversary. I think Belt and Road should be more multilateralized and have more cooperative and more input from European countries. Let's have a Belt and Road steering committee. I mean, let's invite all the European countries to participate, and in many other countries. So let's have an AIB model for BI, and I hope that European countries can really work with China, and Chinese company can work with European too. So we can really put our efforts together for the global south, for the pandemic, for the climate change, and for all the things, common challenge we are facing together. Let's do that together. And Belt and Road 10th anniversary is a good occasion to strengthen our cooperation.
And yet, the EU Global Gateway equivalent has somewhat stalled. I mean, hasn't it, Jörg? I mean, I wonder if you agree with that assessment of the Belt and Road Initiative and where it's at now.
Well, China has a genius about putting a label on something. Belt and Road sticks. It is very popular. As a matter of fact, it's actually very small. when you look into the global investment stock of European business, Europe clearly is number one with 11.6 billion euro. Second, by the way, is US with 6.8, and China is third with 1.9. It's not about 10%, but there is no label on investment from European companies or anywhere. The Global Gateway definitely was a response to Belt and Road, but it's supposed to be a competitor maybe in some areas. But again, the underlying business is very much in favor of private activities, which is not under this label. And if you look into European engagement on an official development assistance grants, for example, Europe stands for 43% of global grants. So Europe is a big player in all of that. I agree with Henry Wang that we should coordinate a couple of times better, but at the same time, data show in the direction Europe is actually outclassing anybody else in international business and investment.
We've been talking about how Europe and China really do have long-established, mutually beneficial ties. But, Mr. Wang, Chinese direct investment into the EU is at a decade low. A decade low. So what's going on from China's side?
Well, certainly, I think that for 3 years, we are not able to travel. The investors were not able to come out. That certainly didn't, contribute to the growth. Certainly, the stock is coming down. But again, also there's some policy. I think we are tightening. We see some European countries tightening their policy on Chinese investment, scrutinizing Chinese companies, or even forbidden sometimes, like Huawei and things like that. So there's also a negative political environment that affected that as well. But I think now with this lifted of the COVID travel in China, so we certainly can see a hike and increase there. But more importantly, I really pin a hope on the high-level dialogue, business-to-business exchanges, and also, the common sense probably will prevail in the end. I mean, after all, as we heard, Bernard mentioned as well, that China is the largest growing market. We have 400 million middle class, could be 800 million in a decade time, and all the European company, China is the largest foreign market now, and more and more European companies are becoming the market leaders in China. So I really hope that this reciprocal bilateral trade and investment will come back. The competitive advantage of both European and Chinese companies will display their cooperation in the new years to come. So I'm really still hopeful. I hope the situation will change.
For Europeans, it's a similar story. We are at an all-time low. If you take out one deal, which was BMW's purchase of his partner Brilliance in Shenyang, actually we went down by 72% in the first half. As a matter of fact, last year, European companies invested more in Texas than into China, which obviously is not natural. And I totally agree with Henry, that's all about traveling, the perception that the partner is difficult. I think that's where 2023 is going to be looking much brighter. We can visit, and by visiting, we can see, seeing is believing, that basically business can be doing better. At this stage, you're totally right, it's miserable, but it can only get better.
And if I may add a little political tone, my hope is that we could go ahead again with discussions on the agreement on investment. The Commission, the European Commission has worked very hard on this together with the Chinese government. Now we could hope that with dialogue improving also at political level, discussion could be held again in the European Parliament with a more favorable view on it. That is my personal hope for this coming year.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. I hope it is a prosperous 2023. Thank you very much, Bernard Dewit, Wang Huiyao, and Jörg Wuttke. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests, and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok.
Coming soon on The Agenda, the future of food, how technology is helping us feed the planet. But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all of the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.